Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating blueprint for a cinematic documentary that takes on, quite honestly, a monumental filmmaking challenge. We're talking about adapting the ancient traditions, the immense cultural heritage, and the sprawling philosophy of Hinduism into one cohesive visual medium. Now, for those of us already deeply familiar with this rich heritage, the most interesting question isn't just about what is being taught, but how it's actually being translated onto the screen. We're looking at a source that outlines a premium, National Geographic-style visual journey. It's basically a masterclass in using cinematography, audio design, and narrative structure to weave history and spirituality together. So we're going to break down exactly how this documentary plans to take these complex, millennial-old concepts and turn them into a truly dynamic, inspiring on-screen experience. Let's get into it.
To really understand the directorial vision here, we've got to start with how they establish the mood. The documentary's opening shot is described exactly like this: a sunrise over the Ganges River, with this soft golden light reflecting beautifully on the water. Just imagine that for a second. It immediately sets a tone that is expansive, spiritual, and deeply immersive. But it's not relying on visuals alone. A totally crucial piece of this blueprint is a deliberate auditory shift. As you're taking in these warm, realistic visuals, the everyday ambient noise fades out, and it's replaced by the soft, deliberate sounds of traditional Indian instruments. We're talking the flute, the veena, and the tabla. It's such a brilliant technique to instantly ground you, crafting a mini-narrative of sensory immersion before a single word of narration is even spoken.
All right, let's kick things off with our first major focus, traditions and cultural heritage.
Think about the sheer diversity of practices this blueprint aims to capture on film. The cinematography literally has to turn on a dime to cover this full spectrum of Hindu life. On one hand, the camera needs to be incredibly steady and intimate, framing those quiet, personal moments of devotees performing daily prayers, the gentle glow of diya lighting, or a deeply focused yoga practice. But then, the visual language has to completely transform. The camera sweeps right into the explosive, communal, kinetic energy of major festivals like Diwali and Holi, by juxtaposing those serene, highly controlled shots of ancient temples with the dynamic, almost handheld feeling of modern, vibrant celebrations. The documentary uses its visual pacing to perfectly illustrate just how vast and alive this heritage truly is.
Now, this living heritage is anchored throughout the film by some really powerful recurring motifs, specifically things like lotus flowers, sacred rivers, ancient scriptures, and traditional sculptures. And here is a fascinating filmmaking challenge. It is notoriously tricky for a director to use static objects, like heavy ancient texts or stone sculptures, to convey active, living devotion. To solve this, the documentary uses these items as dynamic visual metaphors. The camera won't just linger on a scripture. It'll trace the text before cutting directly to a modern devotee, putting those exact words into practice. It's a fantastic way to bridge the gap between ancient history and modern life, giving the audience a tangible thread to follow throughout the entire runtime.
Moving right along, let's delve into our next core pillar, the deep philosophy of Hinduism.
We all know Dharma is the bedrock of righteous living and ethical duty. But seriously, how exactly do you film a concept that abstract? Well, the documentary's blueprint tackles this by focusing on grounded, character-driven cinematic choices. Rather than relying entirely on a voiceover to just explain moral duty, the director plans to frame individual devotees actively fulfilling their daily tangible responsibilities to their families and their communities. Think of these deliberate, ground-level tracking shots that follow a person through their everyday routine. By anchoring the camera in these daily life segments, the prayers, the adherence to tradition, the community service, the film translates an expansive philosophical principle into incredibly compelling, visible on-screen action.
That exact same cinematic translation applies to karma. We all understand it as the universal principle of cause and effect. But portraying a literal cosmic reaction visually? That requires some serious technical depth. The documentary plans to pull this off through clever editing techniques, specifically using parallel editing and match cuts. Imagine watching a sequence where a person's positive interaction within their community is seamlessly intercut with the broader, rippling effects of that action on their surrounding environment. The filmmakers are essentially using montage to collapse time, showing how present actions are inextricably linked to a broader spiritual trajectory. It completely keeps you engaged with the mechanics of the filmmaking rather than feeling like you're just sitting in a theology lecture.
And that brings us to the visual climax of the philosophy, moksha. When a concept represents ultimate spiritual liberation and the release from the cycle of rebirth, a filmmaker has to completely alter their visual approach to do it justice. The blueprint actually suggests moving away from those busy, grounded shots we just talked about. I mean, how do you depict transcending the physical world? You use brilliant, ethereal lighting shifts. You utilize expansive, sweeping wide shots that make the individual look small, yet entirely integrated into a vast landscape. And perhaps most effectively, you pull back the audio, totally dropping out ambient sound, to simulate that profound state of absolute spiritual freedom and release. Chills, right?
So what this step-by-step mapping really represents for the documentary is its core narrative engine. In filmmaking, abstract philosophies absolutely have to become a visible character journey. We aren't just looking at isolated concepts here, we're looking at the protagonist's path translated into a classic three-act structure. Act 1, upholding Dharma and establishing that righteous foundation. Act 2, generating karma, navigating the complexities of the world and learning the hard lessons of cause and effect. Act 3, the pursuit of moksha, the ultimate liberation. Visually structuring the film this way ensures that the deep philosophy has real momentum, keeping the viewer entirely invested in the spiritual progression as it unfolds on screen.
Okay, let's shift gears to our third section, representing the divine.
When it comes to depicting key deities, the filmmakers aren't just using a one-size-fits-all approach. There is a distinct, culturally accurate cinematic strategy for each one. For the architectural scope of Lord Vishnu and Lord Shiva, we can expect sweeping, drone-assisted aerial shots that really emphasize scale, paired with detailed close-ups highlighting the texture of sacred stone sculptures. Moving over to Goddess Lakshmi and Goddess Saraswati, the strategy shifts entirely to two-dimensional classical art, meaning smooth, panning camera movements sliding gracefully over intricate traditional paintings. And for Lord Ganesha, they plan to deploy rich, volumetric lighting on realistic traditional sculptures, casting these warm shadows that bring a profound sense of awe and presence directly into the lens.
Finally, we arrive at our last section, the universal connection.
The clear concluding goal of the blueprint is to visually bridge the gap between human life and the entire cosmos. They achieve this through highly focused, serene meditation scenes that serve as a visual anchor. But the true production value of this sequence, that comes from the audio layering. The physical act of meditating on screen creates the visual connection, sure, but the scale is completely elevated by the carefully timed introduction of background Sanskrit chants. This precise layering of ancient, resonant audio over stark visuals of deep human introspection is designed to perfectly capture that boundless spiritual connection. It really delivers a truly cinematic moment of transcendence.
To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a little something to ponder based on the cinematic blueprint we've just unpacked. When you see this deeply interconnected philosophy brought to life, where everything from the intimate lighting of a diya to the grand cinematic realization of universal connection is so deliberately crafted, how does witnessing that scale inspire your own relationship to the world around you? Take a moment and let that visual and philosophical journey really sink in. Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable vision with me today.